Hi everyone. For today's video, I wanted to react to a statement from Billy Mitchell, Karl Jobst, part 1 of 2, from Billy Mitchell's YouTube channel. It was released 2 weeks ago, and since then, as far as I can tell, part 2 of that has not been released. So I thought at the very least we could respond to part 1 of the video and give our thoughts on that. This will be a react video insofar as I have not seen this before, but I thought given the fact that we've covered Billy Mitchell's lawsuit in the past versus Karl Jobst, it's largely been from Karl's point of view, or people who are talking largely about Karl Jobst and what he's had to say, because to be completely honest, he's had a lot more to say as far as all of this goes than Billy Mitchell. But Billy Mitchell went and released his own official statement, so I thought it would be interesting to hear what he had to say for a change, i.e. as someone who has basically felt the full brunt of what Karl was doing more than anyone else involved in this case besides Karl. So we'll be watching that, and before we get started, I wanted to give a disclaimer. All opinions are my own, i.e. as part of my research conducted alongside my book series, Gothic Communism. The material within is spoken about public figures and popular media for purposes of education, satire, transformation, and critique. In other words, it falls under fair use. And about me, I am Persephone Vanderwaard, a male to female trans woman, they, them, or she, her, poly, dummy pan, 39, anti-fash, and BDSM author, Gothic communist, sex worker, indie researcher, PhD in Gothic poetics, and Little Gothic BDSM, who specializes partly in Metroidvania. I'm also an erotic artist, pornographic historian, and invigilator. The point of this channel and its content is to extrapolate upon the research that I do, effectively in spoken form, though I will oftentimes read essays. This video in particular is a react video, but it falls under the same basic idea. This is a matter of opinion, of professional opinion, through the research that I do speaking about public figures. And this includes Billy Mitchell. But before we get to Billy Mitchell's video, watching it and reacting to it, I wanted to have a part at the beginning of the video that was dedicated to LUS, just to sort of check in on them. LUS, they, them, theirs, is a retired patent lawyer, a patent attorney specializing in patents, trademarks, copyrights, and intellectual property. And there's further information about them. They're pretty upfront and open about that. And they are someone who I've critiqued in the past. I have past videos about them where I describe their behavior as someone who is token. They are a token Asian person to a moderate degree. And again, tokenism is a matter of my research, and I don't just look at it from a racist angle. I look at all manner of bigotries, but LUS, along with a great number of other people I might add, was refusing to acknowledge Karl's racist past, Karl's past in regards to him being friends with neo-Nazis, with people such as Notch, who is a billionaire with alt-right views. And LUS is moderately token insofar as they wouldn't meaningfully critique Karl's racism. They wouldn't make a video about it. They wouldn't put their money where their mouth was. They might have a comment here or there about it, but ultimately in a way that initially they kind of tone police themselves against Karl Jobst. And they'll mention that he's racist, but then say that they don't want to use the word racist to describe it. So they're effectively, again, tone policing themselves. That's what this video was about. And then after that, they also talked about Notch, a racist, sexist, alt-right billionaire who paid for Karl Jobst's defense fund. And LUS defends that person. And I describe how they're complicit in that video. But ultimately what ends up happening is Karl attacks LUS. Despite LUS covering for Karl, LUS half blows the whistle on Karl, discusses Karl's racism, So these are past forms of coverage in regards to LUS, but I wanted to check in on them because now they're making videos about Ethan Klein and the H3H3 podcast versus Denims, Frogan, and Caseytron. And LUS is essentially praising that as a 500 IQ move and circling, in case we weren't sure who he was talking about, circling Ethan Klein. And Ethan Klein is someone that is a genocide apologist. And this isn't just my opinion, but it's also the opinion of other people who have spoken about Ethan Klein before. Noah Samson, Bad Empanada, and Hassan Abi. Various, larger YouTube channels have discussed how Ethan Klein is someone who is a genocide apologist in their opinion. And in my opinion, as someone who researches fascism, I agree with that opinion. My opinion matches their own. Ethan Klein is a genocide apologist, and yet you have the token Asian gender nonconforming lawyer who is basically not saying anything political about Ethan Klein, but instead making a video praising him for being a libel bully and abusing copyright to basically perform what LUS calls a 500 IQ move. And I thought, the moment I saw that, I'm like, imagine if this were just an out-and-out Nazi. Okay, instead, Ethan Klein is a Zionist. Zionists are functionally fascist, in my opinion, as someone who researches Zionism as a facet of fascism. And if you're defending that, or if you're saying anything about them other than, hey, this person is fascist, then that's a problem. That's something that I can critique through the work that I do. And LUS, that's exactly what they're doing. So that's just something I wanted to mention very quickly. And it doesn't matter, if they take the time to get down in the weeds and talk about the legality of it. Oh, the legal system is so important in free speech, and I care about that so much. And yet here he is, essentially praising someone who's a libel bully, or in this case, I guess it's copyright. So it's not defamation, it's copyright law, but it's the same kind of bullshit. People who abuse copyright also abuse the court system to talk about defamation or to sue people. He's suing people, and in this case, he laid a trap for them, and LUS is talking about that. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. Thank you, LUS, for talking about that. But the thumbnail and just the title of the video and the title of these other videos, there's just nothing political here at all. But behind a veneer of neutrality is just, in my opinion, a moderately token Asian gender nonconforming lawyer who is choosing to not say anything about the fact that Ethan Klein is a genocide apologist, but also that he's a bully who uses the legal system. In regards to the people that he's suing are critiquing him for supporting genocide, and that's something that LUS isn't addressing. That's what I'm critiquing them for right now. And so despite the videos that I've critiqued them for in the past, I've also, 2 days ago, I said to LUS, or I tagged them, quote, "I find that politics aren't really something I want to hear from younger people," unquote. What, that genocide is bad, and that the Zionist project is enacting genocide in Palestine right now? I'm 39, LUS, and you're basically celebrating Ethan Klein for his 500 IQ move while ignoring his terrible politics, i.e. despite him being arguably complicit in genocide, apologia, and denial, in my opinion, as someone who researches fascism regarding public figures, e.g. YouTubers such as yourself. Fucking lawyers, am I right? But if we go to the video, this is where he says that.
Free individuals. I find that politics is really not something I want to hear from younger people at this point. I'm old. I'm gonna be 38 in July. I don't need young people to tell me their political views, right?
Okay, well, I'm older than you, and we're about the same age, and I think that your politics absolutely suck. And you can see that not just in the videos that LUS makes, but also them talking about just one thing that was kind of a red flag for me, apart from the fact that they wouldn't actually make a video about Karl Jobst being racist, which is, it's not defamation to call someone racist. It's not defamation to call someone a Nazi, because it's not criminal to be a Nazi in the United States. To be a Nazi, to be a fascist, to be someone of a dubious political standing is just that. It's a political position, it's a belief system, and it's not illegal to be a neo-Nazi in the United States. You can go and wave a Nazi flag in the United States and you won't get arrested for it. You can advocate for various political positions tied to fascism, neo-Nazi or otherwise, and not get arrested for it, e.g. Matt Walsh, Charlie Kirk, and similar individuals. And the President of the United States, Proud Boys, stand down and stand by. You know, it's not against the law to be a Nazi in the United States, and furthermore, it falls under a matter of opinion. You know, in my opinion, so and so, if they are a moderate, white or otherwise, in LUS's case, they're token GNC Asian person, they can still defend fascism ipso facto by virtue of action, by not condemning it, and furthermore by having all of these questions about, will there ever be peace in the Middle East, versus saying, oh, well, imperialism is wrong. Would you go to Hooters with male servers? Homophobia. In my opinion, that is a form of homophobia. Why are you even asking? Like, they'll ask all of these questions, but they won't like state anything politically. Is the U.S. heading to war? They won't condemn war. They'll talk about Trump, but they won't condemn Trump. Juneteenth hit by DEI pullback. Is Juneteenth DEI? What kind of stupid fucking question is that? You know, and has Donald Trump won the trade war? And they it goes on and on. Just every day they have these stupid polls where they're basically fence sitting, which is a form of moderacy. So LUS and their behavior in regards to Ethan Klein and them basically continuing to do what they do, and it is something that really frustrates me, and I just wanted to kind of voice that before we get into watching Billy Mitchell and his own response to Karl Jobst. I thought, okay, let's go over LUS. LUS continues to be a moderate token person who is, apart from defending Karl Jobst by not attacking him nearly enough for having fascist ties, you also have the same basic thing going on through Ethan Klein. And basically just saying, oh, the legal system, I love it so much. I'm interpreting him. This is paraphrase at this point. I'm paraphrasing, or I'm just kind of summarizing LUS, whose actions speak for a love of the legal system in ways that don't go beyond the neutrality of lawyers. It's like, oh, I can't afford to have political opinions. I'm neutral. Well, neutrality falls on the side of the status quo, and that continues with Ethan Klein. So that's LUS. LUS is continuing to be kind of gross as far as all of that goes. But what are you going to do? All right. We've said enough about LUS, in my opinion. So now we're going to go on to the second part of the video, which is my response to Billy Mitchell and his statement. I have not watched this. This will be a blind react. I haven't seen anyone else talk about it, and I just honestly don't know what Billy has said. So we're going to watch this. I'll pause every so often just to comment on the video itself, and we'll go from there.
Greetings, everyone.
The way he talks, it's like, greetings, Earthling. He even looks a little bit like Zod from Superman 2, except he's Zod with a mullet. All hail, son of Jor-El, kneel before Zod.
I originally didn't plan to create a video relating to Karl Jobst. I felt the judgment spoke for itself.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like Billy Mitchell, compared to Karl, is someone who has been relatively quiet and let the justice system speak for everything that happened. Like, he'll still get his licks in, but by and large, yeah, that's what he's done so far.
However, after Karl Jobst's response video and a few other statements by him, I feel compelled to speak. I also feel that this video provides a good opportunity to correct a few past claims by Karl Jobst.
Okay. Absolutely. And I think that, at this point, the lawsuit is over. It is a matter of case law. It was not appealed, so it's done and dusted. This is an excellent time to set the record straight.
But first, Ricky's world famous sauce is running a sale.
Okay, I don't care. I don't care about that. Sorry. Like, you do you and all that, but we're going to skip that part.
Firstly, Mr. Jobst claimed that he couldn't disclose the subject of the lawsuit to his viewers is false. This is because the claim, which is the document that I filed in court to sue Mr. Jobst, in which I clearly set out why I was suing him, is a matter of public record. This means anyone in the world can go down to the court and ask for a copy, and the court has to supply that document to them.
Not only that, apart from physically going to the courthouse, I would imagine that if it's a matter of public record, you could access it online.
I essentially published that document to the world at large, and as such, I could not possibly claim that Mr. Jobst or anyone else had defamed me if, for example, they sent a copy to their fans.
Sure, yeah, it's a matter of public record. It's a publicly available statement. It is true. And if a statement is true, it cannot be defamation by definition. Defamation, it requires something to be false, a false statement. But because it's a public document that is true in the eyes of the law, it cannot be libel. It cannot be slander. Absolutely.
So they could understand the dispute and know what it was about. He also could have done this by acknowledging what he said was false and given a genuine apology. Australian law clearly states that an apology is not an admission of guilt. In a 2019 case, the Supreme Court of Queensland stated at paragraph 17, the fact that the defendant wished to contest that their publication conveyed the defamatory meaning. Secondly, Mr. Jobst's defense that his GoFundMe campaign intended to crowdfund for a second Mr. Jobst's defense that his GoFundMe were in fact conveyed.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, basically, first off, Karl refused to apologize, and Billy Mitchell's like, hey, according to the law of the land where Karl lives, it would not be an admission of guilt to apologize. But Karl refused to do that, and may have even gone so far as to say, oh, I couldn't apologize because it would be an admission of guilt. I don't know if Billy Mitchell is saying how Billy Mitchell is interpreting that, but the implication, as far as I can infer, is that Karl Jobst refused to apologize because it would make him look guilty in the eyes of the public. And Billy Mitchell's like, well, in the eyes of the law, that would not be an admission of guilt. It would not have hurt your case in the eyes of the judge. But Karl Jobst, Billy Mitchell is pointing out, still refused to apologize. And they only doubled down and continued, essentially attacking Billy Mitchell, despite the fact that these records were available to the public.
Secondly, Mr. Jobst's defense that his GoFundMe campaign intended to crowdfund for a second potential lawsuit, but redirected the funds to the existing lawsuit after the second lawsuit never materialized is bullshit. I say this based upon 3 facts relating to Mr. Jobs' financial situation at the time of his GoFundMe campaign and the timing of his GoFundMe campaign. To start, I'll state these 3 facts and then place them into context for everybody. 1. Notch, the creator of Minecraft, funded the early and late stages of Mr. Jobs' legal defense, but he did not fund Mr. Jobs for a time in the middle of the case. Here's the clip of Mr. Jobs himself explaining how this happened.
Good. I had some good news recently. It hasn't fully come. I haven't gotten the money yet. But right at the beginning of the lawsuit, right, Notch, the creator of Minecraft,
Yeah.
he made a tweet saying, "Hey Karl, I'm going to pay your legal bills. I'll pay all your legal bills." And I'm like, "Hell yeah, that's awesome." And then I messaged him and I'm like, "Are you sure about that, man? You sure you want to pay my legal bills?" He's like, "Yep, I want to go through with it." So he got me in contact with his manager. And then she started paying my legal bills. And like 3 months in, the manager's like, "We want to stop supporting you."
For context, the lawsuit started in September 2021. 2. Mr. Jobs exhausted the money that Notch gave him in or about May of 2022. And he then offered to settle the case. Mr. Jobs said this himself on October 9th, 2024, in the comment sections of a YouTube video. I'll read the relevant parts. In May 2022, I made a settlement offer. Originally, when I made the offer, I had spent nothing because Notch was paying. As you can see here, this isn't me acting as if I know Mr. Jobs' legal bills. These are his words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
3. 6 months of silence passed between Mr. Jobs receiving the correspondence concerning a potential second lawsuit and then him opening his GoFundMe campaign.
Yeah, so at this point it was a potential lawsuit. It was not he wasn't served. He was given a legal notice, like a statement of someone saying, "Hey, we're thinking about suing you," versus actually, serving you the papers of a lawsuit.
Now I'm going to place these 3 facts into the overall context. On May 10th, 2022, Mr. Jobs published a video about me that led my lawyers to send a concern notice to his lawyers.
Yep. A concern notice being like, "Hey, what are you doing? Stop doing this. This is not a lawsuit. This is them saying, hey, we're thinking about suing you if you don't stop what you're doing."
On May 22nd, 2022, Mr. Jobs and I were scheduled for mandatory mediation in the already existing lawsuit, one and only lawsuit. Before the mediation, my lawyers emailed his lawyers a copy of a legal complaint related to the concerns notice, and my lawyers said that I would proceed with the complaint unless the current lawsuit resolved at the mediation.
Mm-hmm.
The current lawsuit did not resolve, but I chose not to begin a second lawsuit, even though my lawyers felt that the second claim was meritorious. No further developments occurred after May 22nd relating to that concerns notice.
So you were just proceeding with the initial lawsuit, which was about the foul legend, which would make what happens with Karl and the GoFundMe, which was about the second claim, not the first, spurious.
And the complaint emailed to Mr. Jobs' lawyer. The complaint was not filed. The complaint was not served. My lawyers did not email Mr. Jobs' lawyers after the mediation to request that he accepted service of a second lawsuit. It was complete silence. And as I showed earlier, at this time, May 22nd, 2022, the funds that Mr. Notch gave to Mr. Jobs ran dry. In July of 2022, Mr. Jobs submitted an application to the court of what effectively amounted as a Hail Mary attempt to dismiss the lawsuit. That didn't pan out for him. For the sake of brevity, I'll continue on, but I'll leave an explanation of that application in the description of the video. By the time Mr. Jobs had lost his financial backing from Notch, Notch's money was exhausted, he had failed to dismiss the case, he needed money, and he needed money now.
Yeah, so this was in the middle of things, and this is something that he himself would announce publicly in 2024 on the Camelot livestream. And so this is all a matter of record. And Billy's just addressing this and saying, like, look, you know, just between the start of the lawsuit and the end, where Notch was covering Karl's legal expenses, there was this point in time where he knew that there wasn't a second lawsuit, but that's what the GoFundMe was insinuating, that there was a second lawsuit, or that the lawsuit was about something other than what Billy was suing Karl for. So this is disingenuous on Karl's part. Like, he would have had all the information and yet chose to say something that is deceptive. So I agree with Billy Mitchell here.
But he knew his viewers may not open wallets if he was transparent about the true subject of the lawsuit. Here's what he does. On November 4th, 2022, he reaches back 6 months to May of 2022, pulls out an old legal correspondent that never received follow-up, and he creates a GoFundMe campaign on the premise that he urgently needs financial support for a potential second lawsuit.
So at this point, it's already over with. The lawsuit has never been filed, and he is using that money not for that potential lawsuit, but the first lawsuit that was ongoing.
Karl, I do not accept the fact that you generally woke up 6 months after the last correspondence, and also after your financial support ran out from Notch, and you suddenly felt the need to crowdfund for a potential second lawsuit. You obviously knew the second lawsuit was not coming. Or at the very least, you were unsure if it ever was. You created a GoFundMe campaign with the knowledge and intent to fund the existing lawsuit on false premises. Period. End of paragraph.
Okay. Yeah. And honestly, like even if there's like a little bit of wiggle room for Karl to be like, oh, well, I thought there would be a second lawsuit, like it doesn't like matter, because it's like, just because even if that is true or not true, you know, that's what Karl is. Karl's a con man, and Karl is someone who is relying on that wiggle room to create reasonable doubt. You know, they can say, oh, well, I thought this was the case, and it doesn't change that you can still mislead people by virtue of the fact that you're going to make this argument, oh, I thought it was the case, and then I can get away with fleecing people scot-free. I mean, it's not strictly speaking, or at least on its face, a crime to do that. Not without, like, it would be up to people to prove that he had defrauded his audience, but there's just enough wiggle room in there that, like, you would have to take this to court and you would have to fight through it. But instead, in Billy Mitchell's argument here is like, look, you know, despite all that wiggle room, despite all this stuff, you know, I'm merely going to argue my case in this video. And as far as that goes, it's like, look, one thing we know for certain is that you had legal expenses that were ongoing, and they pertained to the first lawsuit. and then you had a potential second lawsuit that hadn't actually materialized. So what's more likely, Occam's razor, that Karl needed the money for a lawsuit that had yet to materialize, he hadn't actually been served yet, and there's a good chance that he wouldn't have been served, or he needed the money for an ongoing lawsuit for which he had very legal fees. And I would argue that it's far more likely that he needed the money for the first lawsuit, because there was only one lawsuit. There was never a second lawsuit, and Karl would have known this when writing his claim. And I basically am in complete agreement with Billy Mitchell about this.
With that said, I feel it is important to address Mr. Jobs' principal argument against all this. His argument is that he opened the GoFundMe campaign because my lawyers told him that I provided instructions to commence a second lawsuit. His position is, if Billy lawyers said so, then why should I not believe them? Here's the clip of him saying that.
Then in 2022, Billy sent me a third concerns notice because of a video I released in April regarding one of Billy's witnesses accusing him of extortion. And he followed that up with another lawsuit, of which he sent to my lawyers and told them he was going to file it against me. And then he sent me a fourth concerns notice, saying he intended to sue me because I put a 10-second AVGN meme in a video completely unrelated to Billy. Billy was now threatening me with 3 simultaneous lawsuits. The first one had already cost $200,000 in the first year alone. So if Billy filed the second and third lawsuits, there was no way I could afford to defend myself.
Here's the problem. Mr. Jobs testified under oath at trial, quote, "I don't believe anything Billy Mitchell says," end of quote. So apparently the only time Mr. Jobs ever believes me is after 6 months pass without follow-up, and he stands to gain $200,000 from his audience. In my opinion, the irony of Mr. Jobs' behavior here is that this misleading and disingenuous behavior is the exact type of behavior that he attacks people for in his videos.
Every statement is a confession. It's a con man's tactic where they accuse someone else of doing the very thing that they're doing. And that's what Karl did to Billy. And it, just because Billy, arguably cheated at Pac-Man is immaterial to the case, because the case was never about that to begin with. And we could, someone can cheat at Pac-Man all day long and still be 100% correct about Karl Jobst and his behavior. And Billy Mitchell cheated at Pac-Man, and he is 100% correct about Karl's behavior. And this isn't even opinion at this point. This is a matter of case law. Like, Karl Jobst lost the defamation case against Billy. So anything that Billy says at this point is backed up by the judge's ruling. So it was actually quite clever for Billy to wait and then issue a statement afterwards, because his words aren't just opinion. They are a matter of legal standing at this point.
And the harsh reality is he uses these tactics on most subject matters, not just this one. Based upon Mr. Jobs' I lost video, it appears that he plans to dispute the factual findings of the judgment. And based upon his Discord messages, it appears that he's planning a broader revenge campaign against not only me, but my family, my hot sauce company. Here's what I'll say of that with the information available to me today. It's very easy for a YouTuber to create a self-serving video with an unopposed narrative shaped by them.
Yeah, Karl's entire career is built around that.
It is not easy to present those arguments in a court of law.
As we saw with what happened to Karl.
Where the other side can argue back.
Yep. An argument in law it's not just words. It's backed up by the force of the courts. Like, it's something that they can enforce. So one side will make an argument, the other side makes an argument, and then it's arbitrated by lawyers. And if need be, through the legal system more broadly.
And win. Remember, Mr. Jobs already received his opportunity to argue anything and everything that he claimed in his I lost video, or may claim in a future video. Remember that despite all these allegations that he hurls with inflammatory languages, it is ultimately him who the court found to not be a credible witness.
And not only that, the court acknowledged that Billy Mitchell, from what I understand, had cheated at video games, but that wasn't what the lawsuit was about. The lawsuit was a defamation case surrounding Apollo Legend and things that Karl Jobst was insinuating about Billy Mitchell. So despite the fact, again, that Billy Mitchell cheated at Pac-Man, allegedly, I guess, because I don't know, there hasn't been a case about it, but I think it's a fairly safe bet at this point that Billy Mitchell cheated at Pac-Man. That doesn't change the fact that the case wasn't about that, and Billy Mitchell is 100% correct about Karl having lost the case. Karl is the one who, it doesn't matter how many YouTube videos he makes, he has lost the case, and the case is over. It's done with. It cannot be appealed. It is case law at this point. It is a matter of record. So his con, he's effectively shot himself in the foot, or trammeled his own arguments insofar as the case law is against him. He's literally a part of that history. So he hasn't really, as a con man, done himself any favors. Billy's absolutely correct about that as well.
Let's review an example of this in his I lost video. He says this.
I will say one thing, though. The judge found Billy Mitchell to be a credible witness and essentially accepted his full oral testimony as fact, despite our many attempts to show that Billy is a liar. For example, we have Billy on video in 2023 during his Twin Galaxies deposition saying that the effect I've had on him is minimal.
Did the actions that Karl Jobst and David Race and Jeremy Young and Jeff Harris take also cause you emotional distress?
That is minimal compared to this. At that moment in my deposition, I was discussing the allegations related to video games, not Apollo Legend. The questioner listed a series of individuals in lawsuits with me that all related to video games in one way or another, either in the complaint, in the defense, or as a broader background text. All while sitting in a deposition for a Twin Galaxies lawsuit. Then, when the questioner asked why, I said because this is where it all began. Because my answer related specifically to Twin Galaxies and video games. Mr. Jobs will likely respond by playing a segment of my deposition. I'll play it here and then discuss.
What about Karl Jobst? Why are you suing him?
Karl Jobst has nothing to do with video games. He's being sued because he's blaming the death of an individual, Apollo Legend, on me.
Yeah, and so this was in 2023, and again, so Billy Mitchell is just like being really transparent about that. That's what the lawsuit was about. And after this point, Karl had plenty of opportunities to acknowledge that, but he couldn't, right? Because he had taken the money for a second lawsuit that never occurred.
And you're suing him for defamation for making that claim?
Has nothing to do with video games.
Yeah, it's absolutely correct. And Karl was the one who was insinuating constantly, cheating, and he would just never shut up about that, and insinuating that was what the lawsuit was about, ergo that there was a second lawsuit, while ignoring the first one, which was the only one, which was what the money was ultimately being used for.
These two clips of my deposition were two entirely different lines of questioning that occurred hours apart. In the first clip, my answer related to multiple individuals across lawsuits connected to video games in one way or another. including Mr. Jobs, but not only Mr. Jobs, in the second clip. My answers concern specifically Mr. Jobs and the amputations in my complaint against him. Context is everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you presented the clips, Karl in the video that Billy Mitchell is referring to, where Karl was using the footage to basically defame Billy, Karl was insinuating that these were basically asked in tandem, and then Billy's like, no, these were hours apart.
What does Mr. Jobs not do in his I Lost video? He doesn't present any opposing argument to his narrative. Despite hearing my explanation, my deposition testimony at the trial, and despite reading the judgment's reasoning for accepting my testimony on this issue, he just omits everything and presents his position as fact.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. He doesn't admit that he's wrong. He's like, well, I lost, but he doesn't admit any wrongdoing. He still doesn't apologize, at this point, after he's lost the case.
This tactic of omitting inconvenient information to his desired narrative is common in Mr. Jobs' videos generally. Not just the videos about me, all of his videos. Here's an example from his I Lost video.
To be clear, though, I never said Billy caused Apollo's suicide, nor have I ever believed that. No one is responsible for Apollo's decision other than Apollo.
Yeah, but you insinuated it quite strongly. Oh, because of this and this that Billy Mitchell did, Apollo legend, the strain was too much, and he ultimately took his own life. Those were Karl Jobst' words versus Billy, so he's implying quite strongly that Billy had a hand in what happened to Apollo legend, despite the fact that in Apollo legend's own suicide note, he talks about people other than Billy Mitchell, but not Mitchell himself. The only person who made that claim, at least initially, was Karl himself. And Karl and Apollo weren't even friends. Karl actually had a hand in taking down Apollo, but then put all of that onto Billy so that he could grift off it.
That is a very clear statement from Karl there. He never believed that anyone was responsible for Apollo's decision except Apollo.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, let me show you in an exchange that occurred between my barrister and Mr. Jobs while he was on the witness stand at trial. Here, Mr. Jobs is saying to the court, to the judge, that he did in fact believe that I was a factor in Apollo legend's decisions.
Well, yeah, he's under oath, so he doesn't want to perjure himself. And that's something that people need to keep in mind, is that on YouTube, you can say false statements, like it's not a courtroom. And you can do that without perjuring yourself, because perjury is something that occurs, from what I understand, specifically within a courtroom. So outside of that, you can say things that are false, for instance, but then you have to take it to a court of law and make your case. So there is a difference. So under a courtroom setting, Karl doesn't want to perjure himself, so he doesn't lie. But he lied in his YouTube video. But then he lied in his video, specifically I Lost, where he makes this statement where, oh, I never said that he says one thing in his YouTube video, which is, I never said that I believed that Billy was responsible for Apollo. It was only Apollo who was responsible. Yet in a court of law, where false statements are, perjury, he tells the truth, which is that he actually believed that Billy Mitchell was responsible. Like him and the judge, when he's talking to the judge directly, he says something that contradicts his statement afterwards in his I Lost video. So yeah, Billy's absolutely 100% correct.
And before you ask, yes, Mr. Jobs said this while under oath.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's in a courtroom. So yeah, if he's a witness, he's going to be under oath.
You can make up your own mind, but it appears to me that Karl either lied directly to his fans about this.
Well, either I mean, and if he if he was telling the truth in the I lost video, then he would have been lying in court. And either way, it doesn't make him look good.
Or he lied to the court under oath.
Yep.
Third example. When I settled my lawsuit with Twin Galaxies in January 2024, Twin Galaxies and Mr. Jobs jointly circulated a claim that I remained banned from Twin Galaxies competition. That is a lie. Here is the relevant clause to the settlement agreement with Twin Galaxies. Twin Galaxies will work to include any future score submissions by Mitchell to Twin Galaxies leaderboard, with such submissions having to go through the normal Twin Galaxies adjudication process.
Okay, so I know that Billy Mitchell's scores were taken down and that they weren't put back up from what I understand. Again, my information about that is limited, but from what I understand, his original records were taken down because he demonstrably cheated. From what I understand. Could be wrong about that, but that's just the basic gist of things. Like the case with Karl, again, was never about cheating because it was never really in dispute. Like, I know that the Billy and Karl were disputing these things, just not in a court of law. There wasn't a lawsuit going on about that at the time. And there were other lawsuits that Billy Mitchell was involved with other people. From what I understand, he did not win those lawsuits, or they got dismissed or some shape or form. So, but Billy Mitchell, despite all of that, was still allowed to continue competing at Twin Galaxies, according to the evidence that's being provided here. So this is just, as the video says, Mr. Jobs lying example number 3. This is just another example that Karl lies. And people, lie all the time, but it bears repeating that Karl lies specifically about Billy Mitchell a lot. And he does so in and out of the courtroom before, during, and after his lawsuit. So, it's just, I feel like Billy Mitchell is being quite transparent here. And, you can have your own thoughts and feelings about him in regards to him and his, past behavior, but he's, come clean about that and is being very open and transparent, whereas Karl has continued to not be.
So what Twin Galaxies and Mr. Jobs claimed was that even though Twin Galaxies said it would permit future score submissions from me, I remain banned from the Twin Galaxies competition. That just doesn't make any sense. As a result of these claims, I filed a motion to enforce settlement agreement on Twin Galaxies on May 30th, 2024. The court ruled in my favor. And the judge directly addressed this claim by Twin Galaxies as false. Here's what the judge said. I think it's a fair assumption that the intention was to at least allow for the possibility of the plaintiff to submit his scores. To me, this implies that he was not banned.
And again, what Billy's doing here is smart because he has had to deal with this legally, and all of this is a matter of law at this point. It's case law. It is something that came and went through the courts, and he is using case law to bolster his arguments vis-a-vis himself and Karl Jobst. So anything that Karl says, he is on the back foot against case law. So Billy Mitchell, again, is very smart to wait until this point in time because he has the laws in his favor, not just by virtue of, okay, well, I could sue you, the law is on my side, but it literally took his side during a case, and he's using that after the fact to make his counter argument. It's very smart.
In my opinion, the claim that I remained banned from Twin Galaxies competition was a coordinated effort by Mr. Jobs and Twin Galaxies to spread misinformation.
And again, Billy Mitchell is well within his rights to do that, in his opinion. After everything that he's been through and all the evidence that he's presenting, it's a perfectly understandable thing to do, to want to clear one's name outside of a court of law regarding what happened in and out of a court of law.
These are just very, very dishonest people.
Yeah. Fucking oath. Preach, Billy.
But with that said, I will not be submitting any scores to Twin Galaxies because it has no authority. It has no purpose. At this point, Twin Galaxies is only relevant for its history.
Yeah, like as someone who studies speedrunning, I know that Twin Galaxies, was an early organization that held various records and things like that. But there are plenty of leaderboards are not monopolized by one organization, despite the fact that speedrunning.com has its own records leaderboards that it presents to people. I mean, you have different leaderboards that are presented by different people, and they recognize individually the records that they post. So you have like the Mega Man leaderboards, you have deartier.com for Super Metroid, and just various other places besides. I forget the name of the place where they would submit Quake speedruns and Doom speedruns, but there are all kinds of different websites that would post their records. They're not legally recognized; they're just individually recognized by the different places that uphold them. They're modular. They're recognized by themselves first and foremost. So Billy Mitchell's not wrong. He's like, okay, well, they're not an authority. No one is an authority on these things, is the point. So it's just, hey, according to us, this is the world record, because various places will have different people who are recognized as the world record holder. Billy Mitchell's absolutely correct about that.
Today, Twin Galaxies has no physical place of business. It has no office. It has no in-person competition, no employees, no referees, no industry experts. In fact, Twin Galaxies today is one guy with no industry experience that runs a website from his apartment.
Can't really argue with that. Like, Twin Galaxies used to be owned by someone else, and they used to have a physical, from what I understand, like a physical location. All of these things used to be true at one point in time, from my understanding. And now they're not. It's like Twin Galaxies is basically just a historical footnote at this point. And, Billy Mitchell's not taking any prisoners here.
He stands on nothing but the hard work and achievement of those who came before him and thinks money can buy him credibility.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just because you buy a company doesn't mean that, like, you can't just take credit for everything that was associated with it in the past. It's just, again, the reality is that, like, there's a social component, but there's a material one as well. And, also, insofar as speedrunning goes, like, a lot of it is just, okay, who agrees with you? And you have, different places where speedruns are uploaded and recognized, for instance. And when I think of speedruns and where to go, oftentimes it centers around specific games. I mentioned before the Mega Man speedruns and the Mega Man leaderboards specifically, but then also Dear Tier, the Quake and Doom websites. I forget their names off the top of my head. But you also have the GoldenEye speedrunning forum. So different games oftentimes will have speedruns that are devoted to a specific game. So it's not so much about a company trying to monopolize and take all the credit for something, and just because someone owns it, like Twin Galaxies owns the rights to a specific organization, it doesn't matter. Speedrunners more broadly don't care about Twin Galaxies per se. So I would agree with Billy about that. Absolutely.
Next, Mr. Jobs and Twin Galaxies stated many times over the years that this...
Also, sorry to interrupt Billy here, but it's also worth noting that speedrunners cheat all the time. I find it really strange that people are like, oh, Billy Mitchell cheated. And there's this fascination, of course, with how Billy Mitchell cheated, because there's an analog component, because you're working with an arcade cabinet, you're swapping out pieces. And a lot of times cheating boils down to, are you allowed to use a specific type of joystick or some other piece of equipment, including like circuit boards, including emulators versus the original vintage equipment. So the idea of cheating gets there's this fuzzy kind of gray area. You have to have people within a specific body politic as far as gaming goes, that all agree on something, or the majority of them agree on something. And you see this in other speedruns as well with Super Metroid, and there was a specific type of bomb Torizo skip that was only possible on the PAL cartridge, from what I understand, unless you were using some type of controller, and it was a very specific setup, and they had to agree to have, like, okay, we're recognizing that this event happened, but also that it cannot normally be done, just because we want to include other people who might not be able to perform that trick because it's a highly specific thing that can only be done under specific circumstances. So again, cheating is relative to the arguments that are being made by specific institutions within themselves and their board of authority members. It's not, and this is just within themselves. It's self-contained. But Billy Mitchell was turned into this colossal scapegoat predominantly by Karl Jobst across a variety of different registers, just across the internet. He was scapegoated by Billy, and all of these people are like, Billy Mitchell sucks. And it's like, they're saying he sucks because he cheated. And yeah, he demonstrably cheated, but speedrunners of all different kinds cheat within analog and digital media. And I've never seen anyone excoriated and scapegoated to the degree that Billy Mitchell was, thanks to Karl Jobst being as disingenuous as he was. The thing is you can be disingenuous and still tell truth. Lies are built on kernels of truth. And it's like, yeah, Billy Mitchell cheated, but it also wasn't, material to the lawsuit itself. It was about Apollo Legend. And there are all these other things, but it was just this giant distraction where Billy Mitchell was basically being hung out to dry by other people, including Karl Jobst, who had also cheated at speedrunning. Karl Jobst has a video where they say, I cheated at GoldenEye. At least I think it was GoldenEye. But the fact of the matter is that Billy Mitchell was the one who was being attacked. There was this tremendous double standard. And and Twin Galaxies was involved in that too, specifically the new owner of Twin Galaxies, if I remember correctly. But just like, again, Billy Mitchell was basically this punching bag by all of these other people, the pot's calling the kettle black.
Photo shows a rule violation on one of my Donkey Kong World Records because the joystick was red. That's not true. The joystick was compliant with the rules. In 2007, there was no written rules for competitive Donkey Kong. However, the general rule for all games was to use the original machine with a manufacturer's hardware or hardware that constitutes a like-for-like exchange.
Yeah, okay, so again, the arbitration of these occurs within institutions themselves. It's what, if you're having an event that's hosting play, and then you play at that event, it is, by and large, a situation where you are held to whatever rules they agree to. And there's unspoken rules, there's just the general understanding of things, but then something else happens, or there's no specific rules that are written in stone for that event. And then people are like, okay, well, do we count this or not? See how cheating is arbitrated. It's something that is decided upon generally post hoc.
A like-for-like exchange is a functional equivalent. For example, in this case, if a four-way joystick installed by the manufacturer broke, you may install and use a different four-way joystick. That is why the joystick was compliant with the rules. The reason for the rule was that arcade video game manufacturers stopped producing parts in the 1980s.
Yeah, absolutely. Eventually you just run out of parts. You can try and find them vintage, but at the end of the day, oftentimes people will use equipment, and then that is not vintage. It's third party, it's made by corporations after the fact, and then that is something that has to be decided upon as well.
No arcade machine on this earth at that time for any game had each and every part from the manufacturer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unless it was just pristine, it had never been used. But I doubt that machine was one such example.
Nobody's scores would have been valid for that rule. Nobody.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, even today, Donkey Kong World Records occur with non-original hardware inside the control panel based upon a like-for-like exchange rule, both the joystick and the buttons.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Jobs also levies the claim that the joystick was an 8-way joystick, not a 4-way joystick. I don't think he understands how the arcade machine joysticks work. Any joystick may be any number of ways based upon how it is installed. It doesn't matter who the manufacturer of the joystick is. It doesn't matter what the manual says. It all depends on the restrictor plates inside of the arcade machine, which are not visible from the outside.
Yeah, I remember in that video, Karl was like, well, it's red, so it's got to be 8-way. I remember thinking to myself, how do you know that?
In this instance, it was a 4-way joystick. On a separate note, if Mr. Jobs' joystick claim was true, then both him and Twin Galaxies would have walked into court, would have shown the photo, and won their case.
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead, neither Mr. Jobs nor Twin Galaxies ever attempted to use this photo at any point in the trial or even in preparation.
Yeah, I remember hearing that and just being like, okay, if it's a slam dunk, then surely we'll hear something about it again. But we never did. So it's just like, okay, that's kind of strange.
Despite the claim from Mr. Jobs that this photo was some kind of a smoking gun, his decision not to use it speaks volumes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even in his I Lost video, Karl makes a claim that I'm a proven cheater, and that I've seen commentary from around the internet for years now where people claim that there's no doubt. It's obvious.
I've seen various evidence in regards to the way that the screen will load in, and that depending on if you're using vintage circuitry versus an emulation, and where if the screen loads in a particular way, and you see the reason I keep doing this with my hands is because like the bars will like move in this way as opposed to like this way, and like there are certain arguments that have been made surrounding that people have made that would seem to suggest, irrefutably that a emulator was used through specific runs, and that would violate some kind of rule. And just based on what I understand, there were statements made in the past by Billy Mitchell surrounding that, where they're like, no, I was not using MAME, I was not using an emulator, I was using vintage. And then people look at the footage and be like, well, according to how the screen loads in, that's impossible. So that's the one that I remember specifically. I'm like, okay, so the guy cheated at Donkey Kong, for instance. It's like, so what? Like, I really don't care. And like, to the degree that I'm like, all of the legislation and all of the public humiliation that this guy's had to endure. And, you could say things outside of that insofar as various lawsuits that have surrounded his reputation and him cheating and so on and so forth. But it's like, he cheated at a video game. Who gives a shit? So I feel bad for Billy, honestly. And I can certainly make the argument that slap lawsuits are bad, and there are various things like that. But you also have to take what he's saying in stride at this point, just because he's like, look, the people who are antagonizing me are no better. And I would agree.
It's been proved. Well, I ask you to consider this. Twin Galaxies had the opportunity to prove in court that I cheated. It couldn't. Karl Jobst, who was told by a billionaire, Notch, that he'd pay for the best legal representation possible, did not even try to prove that I cheated.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, if they had all this smoking gun evidence, why not use it? But instead of using that evidence, they continue to just leave it ambiguous on purpose. I would argue it's a deliberate strategy on their part, because if they lose in a court of law, then they effectively exonerate the one thing that they've leveraged against Billy for years. and again, this isn't me saying one way or the other Billy Mitchell cheated, because it wasn't just Karl. You know, there were plenty of people who know a lot about arcade equipment and arcade cabinets and competition and things like that who are weighing in, who could say a lot more about this than I could. But just, you know, from my point of view, it just doesn't it just doesn't like matter, because it's like, okay, Karl had his day in court, and Karl chose not to focus on this at all. And I would agree with Billy. I think that's entirely deliberate.
It's obvious, that's certain, so easily provable. Why does the claim suddenly fall apart as soon as it's taken out of the court of public opinion and into the actual court of law, where I have the right to reply and where real evidence is given by real people who swear under oath to tell the truth? And regardless, twin galaxies, what kind of defendant spends hundreds of thousands of dollars, even over $1 million according to his lawyer, litigating a case for 4 years to settle 3 months before trial? A defendant that expects to lose. Lastly, I recently learned that Mr. Jobst plans to engage in a revenge campaign on YouTube by creating videos about me, my family, and my hot sauce company. Imagine that, my family.
Yeah, and I remember hearing like comments about that, literally from Karl himself, where he wants to attack not just Billy, but his family. And then you have people, again, earlier we were talking about LUS, you know, calling for mercy and stuff like that. Oh, well, think of Karl's family, you know, Billy. But then Billy would be extending a pardon to someone who is threatening Billy's family. So it's like, that's just another reason why I really, really don't like LUS as a person, because they're like, oh, please think of Billy's, you know, wife and kids, you know, or wife and kid. As far as I know, Karl only has one child, one son, Maximus. And, you know, Billy's in this situation where people are like telling him to pardon Karl. And I'd be like, why don't you mind your own goddamn business? And because Karl is someone who has, and he's not just threatened Billy, incidentally, LUS has also spoken about Karl Jobst. And let's see if I can find the video. I know there was a... All right, well, I can't seem to find the video in question, or even going through LUS's posts. Just that LUS was someone who was being attacked, from what I remember, fairly recently by Karl Jobst fans. In fact, if you watch this live stream, Karl Jobst threatens to report my channel to YouTube and YouTube partner. If you specifically watch this, LUS explains that he has received death threats, and not just him, but his family as well. And this is something that, again, as far as I understand, was accelerating, you know, and people were targeting LUS, but also LUS's family. And again, this is someone who LUS didn't want to call Karl out for being racist. Like, they would do it, but they would do it hesitantly. But if you're curious about that, you can also watch this stream and hear them talk about that as well. And specifically, if you see the footage or in other people's videos where they're like, hey, I didn't want to go here, Karl, but you forced me. People will use that when talking about LUS and citing him in their own videos, but they'll play the clip out of context, because originally the clip was used on this live stream in particular, where LUS is talking about Karl being racist. I thought I'd just play a little clip from this stream, just to give you an idea. Again, where LUS was calling for mercy from Billy Mitchell regarding Karl Jobst. And Karl Jobst and his fans were attacking not just LUS, but LUS's family.
Can I search? Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Because, again, I don't want to take this out of context. Because it's not Karl Jobst saying this, so I don't know if I should say this stuff. But Karl Jobst's Discord channel, they attack Billy Mitchell's wife in the same way they're attacking my mom right now. Right? Having, banging up, my mom has AIDS, like, this is stuff that is disturbing. The things that they said about me, my mom, my daughter, who is, by the way, 9 months old, what they do is very simple. They say something and then they delete it. But they know the screenshot's going to come back to me, right? They know that somebody's watching and somebody's going to screenshot it and send it to me.
Okay. So yeah, these are the kinds of people that LUS has arguably not said as much about, and they could make a video just being like, look, and in point of fact they have, because that's what a stream is, right? This stream is something that has stayed up on their channel where they're talking about this, but the vast majority of the content that LUS makes is, if we go back to their channel here, about other things. They're making content and stuff like that, but they have this one live stream squirreled away where they're talking about how Karl Jobst is someone who attacked them, and if memory serves, they were harassed to such a degree that they don't want to, on the advice of their own lawyers, and in regards to their own legal expertise, they don't want to make content about Karl and his fan base anymore because they don't want to be harassed. And it's like, okay, that's fine, but it doesn't change the fact that Karl Jobst and his fan base were bad enough that LUS, someone that I've critiqued in the past for not saying nearly enough about Karl, still made a video where they call Karl out. Here's another clip where LUS is accusing Karl of being racist. It's something we've gone over before, but I thought I would play it here.
You thought you were too smart for that. Also, Karl, I didn't want to bring this up, Karl. I did not want to bring this up. Pickup artist. Okay, that's not what I want.
Yeah, like, come on, click on my video. LUS doesn't do it.
Where it is? Where is it?
Yeah, come on, click on my blog post.
It's in YouTube drama somewhere. Karl says I'm harassing him. Karl, you've harassed a whole group of individuals. A whole group of individuals, Karl. Oh, here. Karl will come after your family after I beat you. This. Karl Pay, blah, blah, blah. Delays explanation video. Hey, they did delete it? Oh, here we go. I didn't want to go here, Karl, but you forced me to go here.
Okay, yeah. So that was the clip that I was referring to earlier, where if you have someone who says, I didn't want to go here, Karl, but you forced me to go here. I've seen that played in various videos where people are talking about Karl Jobst and they are citing LUS. If you see that clip, it is always played out of context, insofar as they don't actually include the context for why he was saying that. He was specifically talking about Karl's racist language. not just against Asian people like LUS or women like LUS's mother and daughter, or Karl's wife for that matter, but also people of color, as LUS points out. Yeah, so specifically, this video, for instance, LUS versus Karl Jobst, the story of an ungrateful man. LUS is quoted by Arkamatt Games and Scandals.
I didn't want to go here, Karl, but you forced me to go here. Dude.
Okay, so that specific soundbite is used in LUS versus Karl Jobst, where Arkamatt is basically documenting what happened between the two, because LUS used to be a fan of Karl Jobst, and then Karl Jobst basically didn't care, and his fan base was attacking LUS to the point that LUS was, you know, in his own video here, he talks, you know, explicitly, and it's still up on his channel for anyone to view publicly, that he was or that they and their family were being harassed by Karl, even though LUS, they were saying to Karl, about Karl, to Billy Mitchell, please, you know, mercy for Karl, Billy Mitchell. And it seems awfully strange given that LUS was being attacked. But, you know, again, there's this weird cone of silence, because when people quote LUS, and I didn't want to go here, Karl, you forced me to do that. I even say, you know, when this video by Arkamatt came out, don't forget when LUS said, I didn't want to go here, Karl, you forced me to do this. He was talking about Karl's racism on his live stream. Karl is fascist, ergo racist. And, you know, here you have LUS, haha, greatly enjoyed the video. But there's this weird cone of silence where no one wants to call out Karl for being racist, including LUS. And they're like, no, please. They'll defend Karl when speaking to Billy Mitchell. And Billy Mitchell is like, look, everyone, Karl is going after my family the same way, I might add, that they went after LUS's family. You know, they're threatening them in really creepy and unethical ways. So sorry, you know, kind of a detour there, but I wanted to just kind of explain that, not just about Billy Mitchell and Karl Jobst, but how LUS was involved in that as well.
It seems that the discount code Karl lost deeply bothers him. On May 5th, 2025, at 3:02 a.m., Mr. Jobst wrote on Discord, there are two videos that need to be made. One talking about the hot sauce company, one talking about how Billy needs to stand on things to make himself look taller in photos. Karl, I'm 6'6". I don't need to do anything to look taller.
It's pretty tall.
I've taken thousands of photos of different types with fans since 1982. Some very serious, some nothing but fun. Meanwhile, you're 5'7".
He's shorter than me.
Cope harder. Try not to stretch the truth.
So yeah, it's just like all of this stuff that, you know, Billy is doing, just to kind of wrap up here, because the video is almost over. We'll watch the rest of it, but I just wanted to say that, you know, it's like Billy Mitchell hasn't just had to deal with Karl Jobst, but he's had to deal with people defending Karl in some shape or form. Even people like Arkamatt, Games and Scandals, or LUS, when they talk about Karl, there's a limit to what they'll be willing to talk about, despite the fact that it's not a crime to call someone racist or Nazi, fascist ipso facto, moderate, token. None of these things are crimes. They'll act like it's unspeakable, and they would rather beg for mercy from Billy Mitchell regarding Karl than openly call out Karl Jobst for being racist. And to do that, as I said, in regards to LUS or anyone else, is in and of itself a moderate form of racism. If you're not calling out racism by people who are doing it, and instead being like, you know, Adolf Hitler, could you show mercy to him even though he did all of these awful things to people? Same idea with, and that's just a random like hypothetical. It's a comedic example, but in regards to Karl Jobst, who's friends with neo-Nazis and has received, large financial backing from people with alt-right political beliefs, I can call them fascist all day long. It's not a crime to do that in America, where LUS lives and where various other people live. But like, nobody wants to talk about that, and they don't want to talk about how Karl is threatening people the way that they themselves have been threatened. Like, LUS was threatened to such a degree that he called it out on the stream, while also calling Karl racist. And he himself, despite being a lawyer, doesn't want to talk about any of that kind of stuff, despite the fact that I would argue it's incredibly important. And instead, LUS in particular, when making content, would rather talk about Ethan Klein and how smart Ethan Klein is with his 500 IQ moves, despite the fact that Ethan Klein is comparable in terms of his behaviors to Karl Jobst. Is this the neutrality of the legal system that LUS is trying to demonstrate? If so, I'm not impressed. I think it's gross. In my opinion, LUS hasn't changed at all or learned from their experiences with Karl, and they've gone on to, talk about other people and how they can fuck people over with the legal system. That's gross. And, tying things back to Billy Mitchell and what they've had to deal with, it's like, part of me, like, I've had to deal with people like this. I've had people threaten my work, my livelihood, asking my house to get bombed, hoping I get arrested, all for calling out people for being racist. It is not a crime to say that, not yet. And even if it was, I would still say it. Okay, it's not. But even if it was, let's say that the United States hypothetically gets more fascist and they outlaw the word racist, but they're still being racist towards different minorities. I would call them out for it. Okay? It's the law. Just because something is a matter of law doesn't make it ethical. And that's something that these people need to understand. All of the people who are siding with Karl Jobst or defending him to varying degrees while throwing Billy Mitchell under the bus. And again, I don't know Billy Mitchell. I'm just going off of what I've seen from both sides at this point. I've studied this for a long time. And as far as I can tell, the people who are the worst ones aren't just Karl, but those who defend him in some shape or form. Whereas Billy Mitchell, by and large, he's making, he's making statements about wanting to defend his family, but he's defending him from people that he's proven are incredibly dishonest and bad faith. Whereas Billy Mitchell, for all intents and purposes, you could say what you want about him in video games, but just about him as a person more broadly and how he's conducted himself on YouTube, he's not... Sorry, that was my phone. Forgot to turn it off here. He's not the one who was devoting his YouTube channel and growing it by acting deceptive and, attacking someone or exploiting someone who had committed suicide for personal gain and lying about Billy Mitchell for personal gain and lying about other people for personal gain and turning a blind eye at the very least to his fans who were attacking Karl's critics for personal gain. If anyone walked out from this situation and all of the bullshit involved looking far better, it's Billy Mitchell. Whereas Karl and those involved with Karl have made decisions that have only made them look worse as time has gone on. And that includes Karl, but in my opinion, it also includes LUS. It also includes other people that I've investigated on my channel. We go to my channel here. There are people like LUS, but also Gen X Gamer, and someone that I had responded to repeatedly who turned out to be a real piece of work, who also showed up incidentally on LUS's live stream. On this stream in particular, I actually go over this in another video where Gen X shows up and is saying, oh, well, Karl shouldn't be able to do that to you, LUS, while having previously said that Karl Jobst should sue me. So these people are, largely speaking, hypocrites. because they'll make an argument for mercy regarding Karl, despite the fact that Karl is attacking them. This is like chief token behavior. LUS is guilty of this, but so is Gen X Gamer. I called them out for their own token behavior. And ironically, the person who is the most innocent among all these people is the white cis het guy. Go figure. And not Karl Jobst, but Billy Mitchell.
As for Mr. Jobs' plan to attack my hot sauce company, I don't know what he could possibly claim. I'm interested to know what could possibly lead Mr. Jobs to believe that he knows the financials or the operational framework of a private company. It reminds me of a time where he claimed to know the terms of a confidential settlement agreement back in 2021. Of course, that's why we're all here. That's all for today, but don't forget to buy Ricky's world famous sauce, 10% off at rickysauce.com using the discount code KarlLost at the checkout. Thank you for watching to the end.
Yeah, absolutely. You go, Billy Mitchell. It's just so strange because just to wrap things up here, I had heard for so many years, oh, it's the boogeyman attacking Karl Jobst, and looking at Billy's the most sane one of the bunch, and they don't go after people and attack their families. Karl does. They're not racist the way that Karl is. They are not surrounded by people who act in a similarly bigoted way like Karl's fan base. Now, that's not to say, that fans are fans, and I'm not going to hold Billy Mitchell accountable if he has people in his orbit that are, have said things out of turn. That's a whole nother conversation. I'm just saying that in Karl Jobst's case, we know for a fact that his fan base from Discord and people who defend him like Gen X Gamer and LUS, despite the fact that they're minorities themselves, have exhibited token behavior attached to Karl himself having exhibited bigoted behavior that attack the very things that they claim to hold dear, like family and one's livelihood. I'm not going after any of these people for those reasons. Karl is, and those who defend him are complicit in some shape or form with at least turning a blind eye or having a double standard. Because again, Karl Jobst was someone who was more than willing to attack Billy's family, but also LUS's family, and to sue whoever or make threats of lawsuits, or to have other people make threats for him like Gen X Gamer. And yet, there people like LUS and Gen X Gamer who are like, no, please be kind to Karl Jobst, Billy. Why? What kind of precedent does that set at this point? And I would say that Billy Mitchell, for his part, has handled all of this incredibly well. They've been professional. They've waited until things were a matter of case law and then came forward with their response, while, yes, getting their licks in. But if someone like Karl was being as shitty as he was towards you and your family, I would do the same exact thing. And you know what? It's not a crime to do so. So I'd say congratulations to Billy Mitchell on winning his lawsuit and various other things. I don't know a lot about him other than that. Just what I've heard about all of this through Karl Jobst and just the entire media circus that surrounded this. And I'm glad to see that he's been exonerated from this. Whereas Karl Jobst, by and large, has only continued to make himself look worse, but also, again, the people who defend him. So yeah, that wraps things up. And thank you for watching the entire thing. This is just a react video. It's very off the cuff. It's not scripted. I just pull up a variety of things to respond to. So this is not an essay, but it is a matter of my opinion as someone who researches people like Karl Jobst, but also people like LUS, also people like Gen X Gamer, and also Billy Mitchell. I research token individuals, I research bigots, I research speedrunners, and all of that factoring into my arguments and my research as anti-fascist. So that's just what this is. It's just something that's meant to be fun, conversational, something I can do to take my mind off larger systemic issues, such as, fascism in the United States more broadly. I can tackle that and talk about it through videos like these in between the essays that I write. It's just supposed to be fun. So with all of that being said, if you like the content that I do, you can support me on Patreon. There will be a link in the description, as well as various other avenues for supporting me and the work that I do. And when you support me, you support the essays that I write, the React videos that I do on YouTube, you support the people that I work with. I work with a lot of sex workers to give them a voice, and I write about them and their rights. I write about the rights of trans people and other minorities who are the victims of people like Karl Jobst. So if you want to support all of that, you can. You can also like, share, and subscribe. All of that makes a difference. Anything at all helps. And I'm going to keep making content like this, i.e. React videos on top of the essays that I write. It's all short form content, but the React videos are definitely more loose, and they're just kind of off the cuff, me responding to other people, public figures on YouTube with publicly available content. This is all perfectly legal, and I'm just kind of doubling down at the end here because I want people to understand that this isn't defamation. Truth and opinion, especially regarding public figures, where defamation has to occur through demonstrably false statements of fact, not opinion. And you can have an opinion that's false, for instance, but because it's an opinion, because it's tied to public figures, there is a burden of proof where malice is something that has to be proved through statements of fact that are false. But again, these are opinions regarding LUS, regarding Gen X Gamer, regarding Karl Jobst, and even for that matter, Billy Mitchell. Everything that I've said has just been in response to them and things that they've made publicly available as public figures. If you're a YouTuber, you're a public figure. So yeah, until next time, thank you for watching and stay safe out there.